Hello there. Thanks for joining me and the Youngsters Studio for this week's guided art activity. My name's Hannah and I'm a teaching artist at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. Today's project is inspired by the painting A Particular Kind of Heaven, made in 1983 by the artist Ed Ruscha. This is what we call a seascape, which is like a landscape picture but shows the ocean or the sea. I bet most of you know what the horizon is, the line where the sky meets the land or the ocean. Notice where the horizon line is in this painting. It's very low, which means we get a really big sky. Ed Ruscha often uses words in his paintings, describing them as accidental poems. He wrote A Particular Kind of Heaven, wanting to show a place that is a particular kind of heaven for him, the beach in California. I wonder what your idea of heaven on earth is. Maybe it's a place that you've been to that you'd love to revisit, or perhaps it's a place you've seen pictures of and you plan to go there one day. Or maybe it's a place from your imagination. Let me show you what we're making today. It's a simple collage representing an ideal place, using just 2 colour papers. We're focusing on the horizon line. I like to think of the horizon line as a way of taking a journey through your ideal place. You can include a word or a message just like Ed Ruscha. The words could be about the place, or what you feel when you're in or think about that place. This one says, crisp air. This one is written in cursive, so it's a bit tricky to read, but it says hilltop view. This one says mountains at sunset. And this one says solitude, which kind of means by yourself or being alone. Let's take a look at some of the materials that we'll need. I suggest that you start off with some spare paper and a pencil and an eraser. And that way you can kind of plan and experiment what you're going to do in your ideal place. Then you'll need some colour paper. We're going to use the size 8 inches by 10 inches. If you don't have colour paper, maybe you could paint some newspaper like this, or even a grocery bag. You'll need some scissors and glue to stick with, and if you have some binder clips like this, they can come in really handy for when you're cutting. You're going to need something to stick your collage onto. I have an 11-inch square piece of black paper. If you don't have this, you could repurpose a grocery bag or some cardboard to stick onto. Then you're going to need some materials to do your lettering with. I'm just going to stick to black and white pens and pencils, but you can use anything that you have. And of course you could just draw your lettering by hand, but if you have an alphabet stencil or an alphabet stamp set, an ink pad, that can be pretty fun to use. And you might want to be thinking about what your words or message will be as you're making your collage. So let's begin by thinking about the collage of your ideal place and how you want the horizon line to look. Is there a hill or a valley? A small house on the horizon line? Or a large tree? Is the horizon line low, showing lots of sky, like Ed Ruscha's? Or high, showing lots of land or sea? I'm thinking about my ideal place, and I love being outside in nature. So it's a place that has a forest and mountains. So using some spare paper, I'm going to practice drawing out my simple horizon line. I'm using a black marker so that you can see a bit more easily, but I think I'll have a mountain, and then I'll come down lower where I could maybe have some trees. Remember, we're making a collage and we'll be cutting our horizon line, so it's best to keep it very simple so that you can cut the line in one go. Now remember, I showed you this one with the tree. This is not simple, and I can tell you it was really challenging to cut out. So I suggest that maybe with your first collage you do something really simple, and then you could maybe try something a bit more challenging if you make a second or a third one. So let's just leave that there for now. So now you want to think about what colours you're going to use. How do the different colours make you feel? What fits best for your ideal place? Do you want to use warm colours like reds, oranges and yellows? Or cool colours like greens, blues and purples? Do you want one of each? The colours could be realistic or abstract or symbolic or meaningful for you. I'm going to pick these two colours. Once you've decided what two colours you're going to use, go ahead and stack them together, and you're going to cut the horizon line through both sheets of paper at the same time. You could very lightly draw your horizon line with a pencil first, or you could do your best just to kind of copy from the practice that you drew on your spare paper. Now my tip for when you're cutting two pieces of paper at once is to hold them really firmly together so they don't shift about. Maybe someone can help you hold them, or if you have them, this is where the binder clips can really come in useful. If you have binder clips, go ahead and put two on each side, and that's going to hold them steady so they don't shift about. Now my other tip for when you're cutting is I find it's easier to move the paper. So rather than leaving the paper down and trying to move the scissors, you lift the paper up and move the paper around. And that can kind of make it a little bit easier to follow any of the bumps and dips that you've drawn in your horizon line. Once you've done the cutting of the horizon line, you have some options to think about. What colour do you want to be at the top, and what colour do you want to be at the bottom? Or do you actually want to layer and use them all? That's your choice. I think for today I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm just going to use the two pieces, and I'm going to grab the background paper that I'll be sticking it onto, and it gives me more of an idea of what my collage will look like. So there are some other things that you want to experiment with and try out once you've got it on your background. You might want to think about if you want to stick your paper close together with just a little gap, or far apart. You might want to have it at an angle, or like this. Do you want it to fit like a jigsaw puzzle like this, or did you want to flip one of them over? That's entirely your choice. Once you've decided on the arrangement that you like best, go ahead and stick them down with a glue stick. Now I'm going to show you how much glue you really need. I've already stuck one down, and I'll just show you with the blue paper how I like to glue it. Now, I really want to make sure I glue the right side of the paper. So I want it to look like this on the paper. So I'm going to flip it and put the glue on this side. And with my glue stick, I'm going to glue right off the edge of the paper, which is why I'm using this glue mat. You might want to use a spare piece of paper so that you don't get glue over your table. So there's no need to cover all of the paper with glue, but if you do a good job of doing the edges, then you can just put a few dabs of glue in the middle like that. So let's go ahead and pick this up, make sure I haven't stuck it to my glue mat. And let's see if I can line this up how I want it. So that will do. And I'm going to gently press in the middle and kind of work my hands outward to try and make it stick as flat as I can get it. Now that we've completed the collage, we can move on to the words or message that you want to add. You might want to experiment to see what shows up best on the colours that you've used. So if you have any spare of the colours, that would be kind of handy to test out the lettering tools that you have. So let's go ahead and see what shows up on this blue first. I've got a white roller ball pen here. That shows up pretty well on the blue. That looks pretty nice on the green as well. Let's try the black pen. This is kind of important, especially if you're using a really pale colour and you have pale pencils or pens, or if you have a really dark colour paper and you're using a dark colour pen. You really want to test it out first to see what it's going to look like on your collage. It's always a good idea to experiment. So let's get some spare paper and think about the word that you might want to include. Of course, you could just write your letters, we call that freehand. You could think about the style of the lettering and how you want to place it. You could try different styles, maybe bubble lettering, for example, which can be a bit tricky, but I would say that the more you practice, the easier it gets. So say if I were to write the letter B, I'll do it kind of big so that you can see. So that's the letter B in just a regular single stroke of the pen. If I wanted to make that letter bigger and bolder, I could try and make bubble letters. So I'm going to do it one section at a time. So let's make the stalk of the B wider like that. And now I'm going to come around and do the curve like that. And I've got lots of lines here, but that doesn't matter because I can colour it in at the end so that it looks even. So look, that is the outline, and see how many lines it took me to get it sort of all the right thickness all the way around. And I could go ahead and colour that in and nobody would know that those lines were there. Now there's one other letter that I always used to find really challenging. I'm wondering if you can guess what it is. I used to find it really hard to do bubble lettering for the letter S. Let me show you why. If I just went ahead and drew out my letter S and then did my following it round, can you see how you end up with either the top or the bottom much bigger than the other? So my tip is when you start just doing the single stroke of your S is to maybe do the top quite a bit smaller than the bottom. Can you see that? And now I'm going to come in and kind of complete the loop. I'm going to go all the way around. There, the top and the bottom look pretty similar in size, don't they? So you can think about doing your lettering by hand and how you could make it look good on your collage. You could also try stencils if you have them. Now, my tip for using a stencil is that you need to keep it really still on the paper, because if you go in and try and move it and you're not holding the stencil still, you're not going to end up with a neat letter. So if you have somebody to help you hold the stencil so that you can just concentrate on the lettering, that might be a good idea. And my other advice for using stencils is if you're using pencils, you want them to be nice and sharp. And I actually like using these ballpoint pens for stencils. They kind of allow you to get into all of those little tricky bits to reach. One thing you might want to consider if you're using marker pens is that, you know, sometimes marker pens can still be a bit wet after you've used them and they can kind of smudge. If you were using marker pens with a stencil, You might want to have a spare piece of paper that you can almost use like a shield or a mask to protect your artwork underneath. Because as you move your stencil around, the wet pen could get on the underneath of your stencil and then leave marks on your artwork. So you can kind of shield your letters as you go. Now, if you've got some alphabet stamps and an ink pad, I always like to test out the letter before I use it to make sure I've got it the right way around. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to try the letter B here, and I want to make sure that I'm holding it the right way. There we go. And you can always practice a few times because you want to make sure you know how much ink to put on the stamp. Now I have actually gone ahead and almost finished this piece, but I'm going to finish the word breeze up in the sky. So I've got my first E, so I need to find a second one like this. I'm going to go ahead and put that down there. Then I need to find the next letter. Let's practice there. The letter Z. You can probably tell by my accent that I'm British, and in Britain we say the letter Z as Z, so I have to really think about that when I say that letter out loud. So there, we've written my words. I've written breeze and trees. Have you noticed how I wrote trees sideways? I thought that it might look a little bit like trees growing up toward the sky. So that would be something that you want to consider about the placement of the letters that you're using. Let me show you this one that we saw earlier, Crisp Air. I did actually a different version of this where I made the letters follow the horizon line rather than just doing them in a straight line. I followed the horizon line. So that could be something else you might think of when you're placing your lettering on your collage. And of course you could always draw in other details too. You could maybe outline your letters or do a shadow on your letters. I think I'm going to come in and draw a little crescent moon in the sky. You could even do a drawing of maybe a house or a tree on your horizon line. If you were wanting to have that detail, but it was a bit too tricky to cut on the horizon line, you could always draw that detail in at the end as like a kind of a finishing touch. So I wonder if you've already got some ideas for your collage. Do you have a place in mind for your particular kind of heaven on earth? Perhaps if you share your collage with family and friends, you could ask them to come up with another word or message, and you could create a longer accidental poem. We'd love to see what you make. Tag us on any social platform with #TheYoungsters, or email a photo to families@famsf.org. Thanks for joining me.